developments to come, so more wild swings to come after that. So you can't blame investors for saying, I don't know whether it's a good time to get in or get out or just run far, far, far away. To Stock Swoosh founder, Melissa Armo. We've got CPA and market analyst Dan Geltrude. We've also got Fox News contributor Jonas Max Ferris and Fox Business Network Susan Lee. Susan, begin with you on the craziness of the week and what you're hearing from individual investors and those who serve them, who are probably a little anxious.
Yeah, well, that's true. But I think the bar has been set so low for the first quarter, given that no one thinks there is a trade deal between the U.S. and China. They far apart. And, of course, the Apple news hurt sentiment as well. But that huge stock rally on Friday told me something a little bit different. I was talking to investors on the floor at the New York Stock Exchange, taking a look at what I call the internal market dynamics. When you're looking at the up ratio of stocks trading at 30-1 to decliners on that day, and that's to send the stock markets into positive territory in the first week of 2019. I think that's encouraging for the rest of this year.
Susan, I'm not buying into the fact that we're not going to have a deal with China. I think, and I've been saying, we are going to have a deal with China, and not necessarily because President Trump needs it or the United States needs it. China needs it. So there's enormous pressure on China's leaders to get a deal done with the United States, which ultimately is going to benefit China and it's going to benefit the global economy.
I said other people thought there wasn't going to be a deal. I think there's going to be a deal as well with Wang Qishan, that meeting with President Trump in Davos later on this month.
But, Friday was a great day. Thursday was not so great a day on the fears that China was slowing down mightily. And, of course, the Apple warning, Melissa, and everything else. So wouldn't it be a kick, as I've repeated on this show and others, that, we score a trade deal, but China is too weak to make good on it?
Well, I guess that remains to be seen. They're going to continue to try to pump up their own economy, which gives signs that maybe they're not ready to make a deal yet. And that could prolong the market making new highs again. And if it runs into the summer of this year until we make a deal, or even the fall of this year until we get a deal done, I don't think that's going to be good for the market. I'm very bullish on the market long term, but it remains to be seen, because if there's a stall, an indefinite stall in the trade talks, then it definitely is going to affect the market. But right now we're still holding the uptrend. Everyone's saying bearish, bearish, bearish. We're not. And let me explain why. 2017 was such a big rally and such an anomaly year that you cannot say that a 20% pullback means that it's in a downtrend because of 2017. So the fact is, we are still holding the uptrend in the market. And so if people are still in, I don't think that they should panic.
All right. We're also monitoring another development. Watch closely as this government shutdown that now enters its third week. There has been a sighting of the vice president outside the Eisenhower office building, used to be called the old executive office building next to the White House, where he will be meeting with, we're told, some congressional leaders. We just don't know who they are. Is this having any effect?
I think it's not having. These political things are not as big as what's going with China, too. The point was just raised. I will say 99 was a big year in the stock market, and it didn't stop the first 20% in 2000 from becoming a 50% slide. So that in itself is not going to cause a problem. I think the bigger question is, how weak can China get without dragging us into a recession? And I think if there's a global recession, it's going to be hard to dodge that. But I also think China can go down, so to say, without taking us down. First of all, we're going into this trade war with a stimulus package in the form of tax cuts and spending. The last big economy to go down, so to say, was actually Japan. Trump used to talk about that in the 80s. They peaked. Their market's still down half from 89, and their economy has never really recovered. We had a mild recession when they went down, but we had a tax increase, the no new taxes, read my lips, and we also had the S&L crisis. We don't have a bank crisis right now. We don't have a tax increase. That means we can handle one major country, because, again, Japan was a big deal back then in the world economy.
Well, we have a lot more debt right now.
Yeah. Well, China has a lot of debt, too. As long as the Chinese economy slows down and doesn't spread, if Apple starts talking about every country there's no sales, then we could start talking about dragging us down.
I thought that Apple news was really concerning, because arguably they're probably the most successful U.S. company operating in China. They build most of their smartphones in the country. And this is something that Tim Cook, was one of his merits stepping into the job for Steve Jobs when he took over at Apple, because they couldn't get into China until Cook took over. So I'm really concerned as to what that says about the underlying Chinese economy.
Well, even Kevin Hassett of the Council of Economic Advisors, that he smiles a lot. So I don't get too alarmed when he says dire things, because he's smiling as he says it. But one of the things he said, and Melissa, you can help me with this, is there are going to be a lot of companies reporting exposure to China, and it's going to impact their earnings. Now, they might a good many of them might use it as an excuse but it's a palpable excuse. What are we likely to see as a result?
I think, well, when first quarter earnings start in the next couple of weeks, we're going to see what happens. But remember, Apple didn't have good earnings before they came out with this last week. The last quarter of 2018, they gapped down and fell in the earnings, and they never recovered since then. They've been selling off.
Well, this is about revenues, right? Now, most companies would love to have the revenues that an Apple does.
Well, true. Apple's still a strong company. Apple isn't going anywhere. They could turn around like that. So
would you recommend Apple?
Not to buy right now.
Dan,
no.
would you?
Actually, I would. I think I do think there's runway with Apple. I think part of this is a little bit of hedging on Apple's part because they want to hedge against what's going to happen with China, which the outcome is a little uncertain right now. But I still believe that there is going to be a deal. And I think, Neil, that we have to give President Trump some credit here that he is not a president that's kicked the can down the road like all the other presidents before him have. Everybody's complained about China's tariffs and their tactics and stealing intellectual property.
Bottom line, you think it's going to work out?
I think it is going to work out. I truly believe that.
He's motivated to get it to work out because he wants to run for re-election and get re-elected in 2020. So he's motivated to get it done by then. And not only that, if he does get it done, it's going to be hard to see that anyone in the country, even the Democrats that hate his guts, would say anything negative because it would be the one thing, if he stands his ground, which he's trying to do, if he stands his ground, he will go down in modern history as one of the greatest presidents for having done this because it will help our country.
Well, it depends on what the deal is.
Yeah. Well, he's going to try to make a good deal. If he was going to cave, he would have caved by now, I think.
All right, we're going to follow that. We're going to take a quick break here because I know you'll be back, minus Susan, later on. But thank you, Susan, for everything. In the meantime, we do know, by the way, that the vice president has arrived at the Eisenhower Executive Office.